Good morning, everybody. Yeah, you can hear me better now, right? I see you, Eric Hammerling. I see you right there. Hi, everybody. We're going to start in it's 9:01. I'm going to give it one more minute and then we're going to get going. I know this is a little bit different for all of us this year coming to this building, but it looks like there's a seat for everyone and that was the goal. So really delighted to see everybody sitting down. Unless you want to stand up, that's up to you. So here's a question for you before we start officially, and I stick to the script because those of you who know me know that if I start talking, we're going to be here all day. So I'm going to stick to my script, but I just have one question. How many of you have ever been to a CLCC conference where there has not been some sort of precipitation? I, for one, can say to the best of my memory, I have never been to a CLCC conference where there's not been some sort of precipitation. So thank you for enduring the rain today and making your way over here and joining us. I'm now going to officially stick to the script. Good morning. I'm Amy Blaymore Patterson, and I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Land Conservation Council. Welcome to the 2024 Connecticut Land Conservation Conference. Looking around the room, I see a lot of familiar faces, longtime land trust volunteers, staff, and other people who have never missed a conference and therefore have never gotten wet. No, have always got wet. See, this is what happens when I go off script. But I also see many new faces, and that is just super exciting for us, and it bodes really well for the future of land conservation here in Connecticut and beyond. So before we get started, I'd like to ask each of you to turn to your neighbors and introduce yourself. Okay. Now give yourselves a round of applause for all having the common desire to be here and make the world a better place. That's awesome. Thank you. So CLCC was created in 2006 through the merger of the Land Trust Service Bureau and the Land Conservation Coalition of Connecticut. The first land trust convocation, which is what they called it back then, was organized 40 years ago by the Land Trust Service Bureau. And if you didn't hear what I said, the Land Trust Service Bureau was our predecessor organization. When I joined CLCC in 2010, the conference averaged about 160 people. Today, well over 550 people have registered. We expanded our programming and our lobbying. We've offered financial assistance, and our staff has grown to 7. And as an independent nonprofit, supported by a phenomenal board of directors led by board chair Gwen Marion and vice chair Sue Cope, they all bring energy, innovation, and impact, not to mention a lot of fun, to our services and programming. If you are a board member and you're here, please raise your hand and thank you. And of course, there's you. It's your energy and tireless dedication to strengthening land conservation and your community that continues to inspire us to do whatever it takes every day, all year round, to help you to achieve your conservation goals. Thank you for being here and for all you do. And now for some quick housekeeping. There we go. Your program includes, here it is, a new code of conduct. This policy is designed to reflect the values and behaviors that CLCC upholds and that we expect from all participants at our programs and events, including a commitment to promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion, fostering a community environment of respect for all, regardless of differences, and enforcing a zero tolerance policy against harassment of any kind in all forms. This code is just one step forward toward our efforts to ensure that all feel welcome and are included in our land conservation work. It will be continuously reviewed, adapted, incorporated, and enhanced as part of our CLCC programming. I encourage you to take a look at it, study it, and incorporate it into your own programming. We welcome your feedback and your advice, as always. Thank you. Oops. Your program, again, take a look at it. There are also day of announcements, which include workshop changes. It has Wi-Fi information and other important information. If you need assistance, please ask a CLCC staff member, one of our volunteers with the CLCC t-shirts on, or the students that sit at the USDAN desk, and they are incredibly helpful. Instead of paper evaluations this year, we've created a QR code, and you can gain access to the evaluation form, and we really, really want you to do that. You can do that through that QR code. It is on the, here it is, the day of announcements right there. Please use it. And also, finally, the name tag holders, they are compostable this year, but we'd rather collect them for reuse. So please drop them in a box or return them to the registration table. Our conference is supported through the generosity of so many sponsors, many of whom are represented here today. A special shout out to our leadership level sponsors, USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service, Connecticut Public, Eversource Energy, Regional Water Authority, the Nature Conservancy, the Trust for Public Land, plus 78 other conservation partners, including DEEP, and 39 land trusts. And I'd like to give a special shout out to the Middlesex Land Trust for providing us with water bottles for our plenary speakers today. It was super generous, and we appreciate it. And here they are. Thank you all. Whether volunteers or paid staff, there are land trust heroes in communities everywhere, quietly, without fanfare, working hard every day to uphold their land conservation mission and responsibilities. Today, I'm delighted to announce the recipients of CLCC's 2024 Excellence in Conservation Awards. Honorees, including members of your organizations, please stand up when I get to your award and stay standing so that we can give you all a round of applause at the very end when I'm finished. The Cajun Coley Award for Excellence in Conservation goes to Barton Jones, president of the Cornwall Conservation Trust. He has served in that role since 2011 and has been a board member since 2009. Bart lives in Cornwall. He might not be here yet. Under Bart's hands-on leadership, the Land Trust has greatly accelerated its pace of conservation, enhanced the stewardship of miles of trails, and connected people with nature through programs and hikes. In the true spirit of the Cajun Coley Award, Bart's volunteerism extends beyond the Land Trust to other conservation organizations in Northwest Connecticut, where he continues to serve his community and region with passion and dedication. When you see Bart today, give him a pat on the back. He deserves it. The Excellence in Conservation Organization Award goes to Trap Rock Ridge Land Conservancy. Formed in April 2023 from the merger of East Granby, West Hartford, and Wittenberry Land Trusts, Trap Rock Ridge takes a regional approach to help communities in its expanded service area to protect the environment, preserve local farms, and connect residents with the outdoors from ridgelines to the river. The 15-month collective journey to work through any differences and focus on their common goals to create a larger and stronger regional land trust was deserving of recognition and celebration. Congratulations, Trap Rock. If you are here, please stand up. Well done. The Excellence in Community Engagement Award goes to Aspetuck Land Trust, with special recognition to Conservation Outreach Manager Reggie St. Fort Collin. By establishing conservation outreach, I'm sorry guys, there we go. By establishing conservation outreach and spearheading programs that bring residents into nature, Aspetuck, through Reggie's energy and creative grassroots leadership, has bridged the gap between urban living and nature, successfully introducing over 150 Bridgeport children and adults to a range of nature experiences from trout fishing to beekeeping and beyond, fostering a deep appreciation for the environment. Stand up, Aspetuck. Well done, Reggie. Two special awards are being given this year. The first, a Conservation Hero Award, goes to Hiram Williams. There he is, who served as president of the Northwest Connecticut Land Conservancy for 19 years. Through patient, persistent, and diplomatic leadership, Hiram spearheaded the organization through mergers, doubling the protected land area under his presidency, and making NCLC the largest steward of protected land in Connecticut, conserving over 13,300 acres. Staggering. Although he stepped down as president in 2023, Hiram continues to serve on the NCLC board, chairing the Acquisition and Stewardship Committee, and was instrumental in negotiating a monumental deal to preserve 5,300 acres of water company supply lands in northern Connecticut. I know Hiram's not here today, but if folks from NCLC are here, please stand up and congratulations. Thank you. And last but not least, a special award for excellence in conservation law. And this goes to attorney Peter Cooper of New Haven. An esteemed lawyer and advocate, Peter has dedicated his life to promoting and leading conservation efforts in Connecticut, demonstrating a unique blend of civility, tenacity, and creativity in his work. Throughout his career, spanning over 5 decades, Peter has represented citizen groups and land trusts, guided statewide conservation organizations, including CLCC's predecessor, the Land Trust Service Bureau, and through his successful legal battles to protect valuable natural resources, has had a profound impact on Connecticut's environmental landscape. We are delighted to name this award for Peter, for lawyers in Peter's honor. Thank you. And I know Peter's not here today, but if those of you who have ever interacted with Peter can raise your hand, I have a feeling there's many of you. Yeah, thank you. And Linda, Francois, are you in here? There you are. Linda, you can stand up. Linda is Peter's partner as well. That's really what I was looking for. Congratulations to all our award winners. We will host separate celebrations throughout the spring and summer to really enjoy the community element of all the work that you do. So thank you. Slide behind. I am not good at this. All right. As you fasten your name tags today, I urge you to pause and reflect on those stripes. As many of you recall from last year's conference, they tell a story of warming temperatures, a stark reminder of the urgent challenges we face due to climate change. In a recent podcast interview, I was asked what I thought life would look like in the future if the state failed to meet its land conservation goals. The answer is one I don't like to think about, but of course I do every single day, and I'm sure you do as well. Science provides compelling evidence that without accelerating our conservation efforts and investments in nature, Connecticut, indeed the entire planet, will undergo profound transformations. Transformations that jeopardize our very existence. It's sobering thoughts to say the least. But as our keynote speaker will discuss, science provides reason for optimism if we take action now. Through our collective dedication to protecting nature, we possess the power to reshape our future. A future where clean air and water are not luxuries, but rights. Wildlife flourishes in protected habitats, our climate is stable, and every individual has equitable access to healthy local food and the other benefits of nature. To that end, we stand at a pivotal moment here in Connecticut. When you registered today, you should have received a call to action. And if you didn't, there are plenty of them right on the desk out there. This call to action highlights key legislative initiatives that recognize the indispensable role of nature-based solutions in addressing the worsening impacts of the interrelated crises of climate change and biodiversity loss. We are almost halfway through the legislative session, Please reach out to your legislators, share the stories of your conservation endeavors and how they have impacted your community, and advocate for the preservation for our kids, grandkids, and future generations, the preservation of our environment. No one is better equipped to lead this charge and harness the power of nature than all of you in this room today. And no one is better equipped to explain the science behind why now is the time to speak up for nature than our keynote speaker, Bronson Griscom. Bronson leads Conservation International's Natural Climate Solutions science team, playing a key role in the strategic development of natural climate solution science across the organization, leading a collaborative research agenda that helps deliver on the organization's climate goals. He's the lead author of a landmark study that introduced the term natural climate solutions, which he will talk about today. And just as an aside, he's a really nice guy. If you haven't already, I encourage you to read his full bio and his publications and talk to him. He's really, really a nice guy, and he's really smart. Please join me in welcoming Bronson Griscom, our 2024 Connecticut Land Conservation Conference keynote speaker, who will share his insights on natural climate solutions. Thanks, everybody. I don't think you need the stool.
Amy, I'm so glad you changed the slide because that bio picture was taken long enough ago that my hair colors changed a little bit. Last night I was having dinner with some colleagues at the Yale School of the Environment, and they impressed upon me the importance of this meeting and the impact of you all, of this group. You all already know this, but I just want to emphasize the honor for me of being invited to speak. So thank you, Amy. Thank you, Aaron and team. It's really an honor for me. It's also a kind of a personal little bit of nostalgia joy. My family's from Connecticut. Absolutely. Is that better? Okay. Here, I'm gonna just adjust this a little bit if I can. All right. So I can get this a little bit up. I have very distinct memories of eating a very tall, soft serve Carvel ice cream cone in the back seat of my grandfather's Buick in Westport, Connecticut, where we spent a lot of time. So it's just Connecticut is home for me. I did change the title of my talk just this morning because I realized that I think I had like Awakening the Sleeping Giant. Nature is not asleep. And we'll talk about that, but there's a lot more that nature can do. Before I jump into this, the content, I wanted to do a little bit of, I guess, terminology housekeeping. There are a bunch of this concept of nature-based solutions, natural climate solutions, nature-based climate solutions. This has taken on it's come a long way in the past couple of years. I think it's become very well recognized, but also a lot of confusion about what these terms mean and just the sort of alphabet soup of terminology and acronyms. So NBS stands for nature-based solutions, a term coined by the IUCN. And it's a very broad term. It includes adaptation, resilience, and mitigation, among other things. The term EBA is just one. I think there are more than one term for adaptation resilience, but ecosystem-based adaptation. And then NCS is a term that refers specifically to the climate mitigation dimension of what nature can do, obviously, with our action. And I want to emphasize that there are lots of different ways of measuring adaptation resilience and NBS. NCS does focus our mind on the climate mitigation, so that the unit of that is CO2e. So the E stands for equivalence of other greenhouse gases. So it basically is a way of measuring changes in all greenhouse gases, either avoided emissions or enhanced removals in a single unit of tons of CO2. Okay, so with that little housekeeping done with, and of course there are safeguards around how we deliver on that, those tons of carbon. So it's not just carbon, of course. Safeguards in terms of it's got to be positive for local communities. It's got to be positive for biodiversity if we're going to refer to it as a successful natural climate solution. We did just publish a paper about this and trying to clarify some of these terminology because that so people hopefully to just help in these conversations. Now, before I go on, I have to say I was brought up going on Sunday to beautiful churches like this, and I was never allowed to speak at a church. I'm not sure why, but I do feel a little bit of blasphemy here, having a science presentation at a church. And I'm going to go off script for a moment and just say, I actually do, just in case I'm going to get in trouble. I do think there's something spiritual about this topic. We are talking about an ethereal, invisible substance that we each breathe out every moment. It connects, it is the molecular backbone of life on Earth. So there's the good side. And it is the primary cause of the biggest existential environmental issue we have. Anyway, just to pause and reflect that it's not just science. There is something, I think, kind of amazing in both good and bad ways about this topic. Now, I want to start with, but getting back on script here. I want to start this with a little bit of what I call myth busting. So in the process of these concepts and these terms being popularized, there's a fair amount of controversy about this question about nature-based solutions, natural climate solutions. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what I think of some of the controversy that I've heard and my response to some of the, I think, criticisms, concerns, some of which are legitimate and some of which are not. And then we'll dig in and kind of roll up sleeves and talk about some of the specifics. What are we really talking about? What's the reality on the ground that the opportunities on the ground that we should be thinking about? And then finally, a little bit about the way forward, the people involved. How do we unlock this? And really, all of this is really just a kind of a teeing up for the conversation that we're going to have after this. Okay, so myth number one: when we think about climate mitigation, solving climate change. Before I got into this space, I'm a tropical forest ecologist by training from many years ago. And about 15 years ago, I got into this question about the interaction between ecosystems and climate. So sort of became a climate scientist. But before I did, I think about climate mitigation. I think about solar panels. How do you avoid change the energy sector so you're avoiding fossil fuel emissions? Electric cars, transportation sector. And these are absolutely essential to climate change, of course. But I think for many people, natural solutions to climate change have been kind of a bit of a head scratcher. Like, is it a big deal? Is it a serious thing? Is it a side dish? Should we do it? Seems a little bit optional. So this has been put to rest, I would say. Recently, the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, was really essentially the entity that brings together an incredible number of scientists and to basically get as close to scientific consensus on climate issues as we can get. This is, I know you can't see this. The font is too small, but don't worry, trust me. I'll walk you through it. But what this does is these bars, all these horizontal bars, indicate the amount of climate mitigation that can be delivered from a whole variety of different types of actions across all 6 sectors that have been identified that can deliver climate mitigation. And we add these up, and the largest of these sectors can deliver over 13 billion tons of climate mitigation. So that is avoided emissions or enhanced removals combined. Either way, you're delivering a ton of climate mitigation. And that sector is called AFLU, agriculture, forestry, and other land use. That is effectively a synonym for natural climate solutions. Close second is energy sector, right? 12 billion tons. Then the rest are pretty far from that. Transportation comes in at, I guess, where is that? 3.8, so about 4 billion tons. Buildings at 2.4. So you get the picture. Okay, so it's not a small potato, it's a big potato. And this is a publication we came out with in 2019 that was, I'm sorry, 2021, that was led by Stephanie Rowe, that was the basis for that 13.6 estimate. There's another graph, which is one of my favorite graphs. It buried in this IPCC report. And this is the size of these bars is the amount of current investment in each of the biggest of these sectors. And as you'll see there, although you probably can't see it, the NCS sector is the least invested. So it's the biggest climate mitigation potential, lowest amount of investment. Why is that? I think there are a variety of reasons, but let's talk about a couple of them. So one of them is there's I think some existential concerns about, well, wait a second, we read in the newspaper every week, every month, I don't know, some regularity about significant wildfires that are occurring in different parts of the world, other kinds of disasters that are occurring, hurricanes, things that are impacting both us and nature. So, would you plant a tree and grow a tree if it's going to burn down? I mean, is that a bad investment? So there is a false balance of news here, okay? So big fires make big news. What doesn't make big news is the incremental increase in the growth rate of trees and other plants due to carbon fertilization. CO2 is plant food. The response of global ecosystems to climate change has been an increase in the rate of sequestration on net. So that increases accounting for the emissions from fires. That's kind of amazing. It doesn't get much press. So 25% of our anthropogenic emissions are reabsorbed by terrestrial ecosystems because of not just CO2 fertilization. It's actually kind of quite a complex question, and we're still trying to figure it out as to why that's happening, but that's happening. So yeah, it's very much something we should invest in. And longer durability, so it's better, people in the engineering space that I talk to and work with, they emphasize, hey, a carbon brick is storing carbon pretty much forever. You bury that carbon brick and that's great and that's durable, but a tree grows and a tree dies. Every decade counts. So yes, it's great to have a very durable storage of carbon, but you don't have to get to 100 years for that to be important. Every decade that you store and remove carbon from the atmosphere is a decade of reduced climate change, and we are going through a bottleneck period. And so doing it now is more important than putting that worrying about that storage later. So I would make that argument, even though this issue is important, it does matter that we take action now. And scale matters, right? So as you all know, it's not just about a single tree, it's about landscapes and it's about ecosystems. So when you get up to the scale, ecosystems are a very durable solution. Not only are they durable, but as I've just mentioned, because they are actually on net and on average at large scales are increasing removals. They're sort of a great investment, but there are limits to that. And there's evidence that there is saturation of that sort of natural subsidy that we've been getting. And they're very, I guess, serious concerns that we could reach a point, we could push the system far enough that it could switch from being a net sink in response to climate change to being a net source in response to climate change. Ecosystems hold 4 times more carbon than our atmosphere. So imagine if we had a 20% release of carbon from ecosystems. That would double the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. That would be catastrophic. So there is reason actually to be concerned about eventual reversals, not that's what's happening right now, but eventual reversals. And if we invest in nature, but we have no choice but to do that, because that kind of, we have to invest everything in avoiding that kind of reversal, in increasing the resilience of ecosystems by restoring and protecting them. This is just a paper we published recently that gets into the details of this, this kind of issue. One other myth I want to talk about is a greenwashing myth. So there's a concern that, I think this is a concern that corporations are tending to use the purchase of green carbon credits to basically distract us from bad actions that they're taking. And I do think this is like a legitimate concern. I think this could certainly happen. We got to keep an eye on that. And this is not a space that I'm an expert in. I don't track, corporate behavior and these issues. But the ecosystem marketplace is a report that a group of NGOs puts out, and they recently did a review on this. And what they found is that the big corporations that are buying green carbon credits, basically NCS credits, tend to be ahead of the pack. They tend to be doing a better job of cleaning their own house, which is to say reducing their own footprint, their own fossil fuel emissions. So it's the reverse, according to this report, that the big corporations that are engaging in this green credit market, that's actually an indication that they've gone through a process of cleaning their house and they're trying to go an extra mile. So this is a big issue. We have corporate partners, so I guess that there's a conflict of interest in me talking about this, but they very much say, like, look, if we're going to get punished for sticking our heads kind of over the parapet and engaging in this market, that's, we're willing to take a certain amount of heat. But so I think this issue of kind of anyway, I think the biggest concern I have is those companies that are not doing anything, right? That are not engaging in this space, they're not taking risks. And I think so. I think that largely, not always, and we got to keep an eye on it, but largely this fear of greenwashing seems to be a bit of a myth. Finally, I would just say that the basic economics of emissions trading makes sense. Markets are efficient. That's why we have markets. So I'm an advocate for this. By no means are markets and trading the only method. For sure not. We need regulation. We need all kinds of changes, different types of changes. But I do think that that emissions trading is an important method for actually bringing the kind of resources to the land stewards on the ground in remote places that otherwise would be hard to reach through regulations alone. All right. Finally, into the kind of rolling up our sleeves and getting into the details of what this stuff is to inform our conversation. This is a graphic that we published in 2017, and it was a review of essentially identifying 20 different types of natural climate solutions at a global level that deliver this 13+ billion tons of potential at less than $100 per ton. And I'm not going to go through, I know you can't see the font up there, but just to say that this spans, it's not just forests, right? It spans across forests, agricultural landscapes, grasslands, wetlands. All of these different ecosystems are part of this important story. And it involves three basic types of changes in behavior: protection, so avoiding emissions from avoiding damage and destruction of ecosystems; restoration, of course, the opposite of that; and improved management of working lands, climate smart forestry, climate smart agriculture. And then part of what we've done is looked at all the different types of co-benefits that come with that. The secret sauce that all of us, of course, know about: air filtration, biodiversity, water filtration, flood control, soil fertility, et cetera. The majority of natural climate solutions globally are in the tropics. The tropics are just sort of a higher metabolism kind of engine room of life processes, so it makes sense. And depending on where you are, of course, the balance between protection, management, and restoration opportunities may vary. But despite that, getting to the United States, the US, despite being the second largest fossil fuel emitter in the world, about 30% of our low-cost climate mitigation can be delivered from natural climate solutions in the US. So big opportunities in the US. Now, in the US, we're a post-frontier country, right? We don't have a rapid rate of deforestation anymore. And what that means is that that protection is still big. So avoiding emissions from the loss of ecosystems, the conversion of ecosystems is still a big deal. But the biggest opportunities in the US tend to be in this improved management, so climate smart agriculture and climate smart forestry. Restoration is a huge opportunity in the US, but it tends to be more expensive. And so at low cost, restoration opportunities, that is to say, taking a cattle pasture or productive field and turning it back into a forest, is going to hit a cost barrier. But as we get to willingness to pay more, which is very rational to avoid higher costs later, that restoration piece will become increasingly important. All right, so here's a paper that we published in 2019 led by Joe Fargione, on specifically identifying the suite of natural climate solutions in the United States. Again, I know you can't see the font. So I'm just going to walk through a couple. And what I've done is, we don't have a study that specifically looks at Connecticut. We can, for some of the data, we're able to pull out the Connecticut specific opportunity. But a lot of that, but for others, we have not yet done that level of state level analysis. But I wanted to flag and just quickly touch on here the ones I've outlined in green, which I think are probably the ones that are particularly relevant in Connecticut. But this is where my expertise kind of gets to the edge, and your expertise is the key as we go forward to figure out, like, what is the story in Connecticut? So reforestation in the US, that's the very top, bar there. And let me just say that, again, the size of the width of that bar is the amount of global mitigation that can be delivered. And then the sections of those bars to tell us the cost-effective parts of that total potential. So the very dark portion of the bars on the left is the low-cost mitigation potential. So if you have a big dark bar, that means that you have a big chunk of that total potential could be delivered at low cost. And then the intermediate gray is intermediate cost. And when you get to the white bar, like in the reforestation at the top, that means it's more than $100. So it's probably going to be hard to sort of economically justify that with climate mitigation. But of course, there are other things that could justify that sort of all that level of restoration. But hopefully that you get the picture on sort of how to interpret this graph. Okay, so starting with reforestation, it's the biggest in terms of total potential, but it is cost constrained, such that the actual biggest cost feasible potential is through natural forest management in the US, right? So basically better silviculture, better lower impact forestry machinery when harvesting this kind of stuff. And I circled that with a darker line because in Connecticut in particular, because it's a majority forested state, I think Connecticut in particular, this is going to be the largest climate mitigation potential that could be delivered in Connecticut ecosystems, is improved management of natural forests that are under production, which is many of the private and forests in this state. Avoided forest conversion, so that's just protection, is the third largest opportunity and a very important one, and certainly an important one in Connecticut. Urban reforestation is something that's often talked about and I'm asked questions about. It's very expensive on a per ton basis, but the benefits of that go way beyond climate, of course. I mean, it's where most people are interacting and receiving shade and reducing heating bills and other forms of emissions through that. So there's much bigger story about urban reforestation, but what I would say is that it's not something that was likely to be financially justified through climate mitigation alone, but it would very much be justified by various other things, benefits of urban reforestation. And then we can go on down, and I think I'll just we'll leave this to discussion, but a whole variety of climate smart agriculture opportunities relevant in Connecticut. Cover crops, biochar, alley cropping, cropland nutrient management. So that's like precision ag. Precision ag is, to me, it's not my specialty, but it's an exciting one where you're basically helping farmers professionalize their production systems, which sounds kind of very technical, and it's an engineered solution, but it reduces nitrous oxide emissions, which is an important greenhouse gas, and it of course reduces runoff of nutrients into streams, and streams hold some of the most endangered biodiversity that we have. So nutrient management is an important one. Windbreaks, that's integrating trees into agricultural production systems. Tidal wetland restoration, I think, is probably another one that is likely to be important here in Connecticut. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to flag, something that Aaron asked me to flag, is the adaptation side of this, right? My specialty and my ability to speak to things is focused on the mitigation side. A lot of these are delivering adaptation and resilience benefits, but I'll flag some of those that I think are particularly important in that regard. Reforestation, if we reforest in riparian areas and in wetland systems, that can be particularly important for flood control, water filtration. Urban reforestation, of course, urban heat islands can be mitigated, adapted. Cover crops, extreme weather events can drive a lot of erosion in agriculture systems, but if we have cover crops in that production system, that can go a long way in adapting to that. And of course, we know that wetlands are incredibly important for adaptation, flood control, storm surges, et cetera. Okay, this is a tool the Nature Conservancy developed. I used to work in the Nature Conservancy, and we launched this process to basically display and make available a lot of the data that's out there, both that we've published and others have published, down to the state level. So you can get on this website and download some of that data. Again, we don't have all the topics that we just worked through that's available through this, but wanted to flag this resource. Finally, that's great. I'm a biologist, ecologist. I focus on the sort of the accounting and the sort of biophysical dimensions. But this is about people changing behavior. And so the stewards on the grid, the folks that you all interact with all the time are the key to this, right? The key to natural climate solutions. So we put together basically it's a theory of change. It's very simplistic in many ways, but just thinking through, okay, so who are the people on the ground that are fundamentally going to make the difference here in terms of natural climate solutions? And so we just, again, there's no perfect system, I guess, for pigeonholing groups of people, but we try to do that just to think about how to have this conversation. We identified 5 major groups of people: indigenous communities, livestock managers, foresters, farmers, and public land managers. I will just flag that there's increasing evidence that indigenous communities tend to manage their lands in ways that deliver more natural climate solutions. And so improving titling, we actually a paper that's soon to come out. There's just empirical evidence that improving titling and land recognition for indigenous communities tends to deliver natural climate solutions. So they're examples of counterintuitive, or not counterintuitive, but it doesn't have to be just going out and buying machinery and doing this, but actually, titling traditional lands. That can be a way of delivering natural climate solutions. There's all of us, of course, that many of us are not actual land managers. We are let's just say, part of the global commons that is benefiting from these actions or potential actions. And we think about, there's a whole bunch of what we think of as enabling actors, policymakers, and these are just icons up here that represent that. Policymakers, financial sector, business, and social movements. We kind of left out NGOs like ourselves because, well, we were putting out the report, so we should add an icon for civil society organizations like our own. And there are just 3 basic ways that we can think of in which the interaction between these enabling actors and the stewards on the ground can take place. There can be financial incentives, the most direct way in a sense. There can be policy change, of course. And as a scientist, I can't leave out information. So scientific information that can really change the game in terms of monitoring and reporting and verifying and all sorts of other things. So this is it. It's very simplistic, kind of basic theory of change about how did these things happen, but in the hopes that might help our conversation. Okay, one last thought before we move on to Q&A and a discussion. This is humbling stuff, and frankly, it can be kind of depressing to think about this magnitude of this challenge. And we're all, I think, and Amy mentioned earlier, kind of disturbed, I think, by the notion of what would it mean if we cross a tipping point with climate change, and can we, as individuals and groups, really move the world? There's a tipping point that we are already crossing right now that rarely gets talked about, and I think it's important to talk about. It's a concept of peak land. So from the beginning of civilization, human population has been increasing, and we, mostly through agriculture, have had this increasing footprint on the planet. And we've recently passed the point where we are actively managing more than 50% of ice-free lands on Earth. So we talk about the age of the Anthropocene. Interestingly, that increase in footprint has leveled off. And in fact, this is a little bit of an old study. It's from 2012. But the more recent data has shown this sort of flatlining of this footprint of essentially active land management by humans on the planet. That's due to a couple things. So the rate of human population growth has declined. It's still increasing. So human population is still increasing, but the rate of growth is declining. So which is to say that that curve is leveling off and is expected to reach a maximum human population in the coming later this century, but sooner than expected. Meanwhile, the rate of agricultural technology, basically the ability to produce food per unit area, has continued to advance, such that we're reaching this tipping point where we are seeing and anticipating, just from macro trends, not from sort of having to do something, but from just these macro trends, we are expecting to see a decline in the global footprint of humanity on the Earth. Like right now, we're seeing this. This is incredible. I mean, this is kind of mind-blowing to me. We are, in theory, entering an age of restoration based upon macro trends. There's a fly in the ointment. It's called climate change. That could disrupt those trend lines. But one of the best ways we have of avoiding that disruption is to accelerate that trend line, to accelerate that restoration through protection and restoration and better management, and to hand to our grandkids and great-grandkids and great-great-grandkids a greener planet. So I'm saying, I think that yes, there's tremendous cause for being kind of overwhelmed and profoundly disturbed by a lot of things that are going on, and that's the challenge at hand. But let's not forget that the basic science and the basic trends that are very hopeful about that we don't talk about, and that can give us some hope that we really could turn this around. Thank you. Yeah.
So high.
Okay. So yeah, please.
So we're doing Q&A now. And so if you have a question for Bronson, please raise your hand. We'll get to as many of them as possible. And then we're going to move to our roundtable discussion, where which will also be followed by Q&A. Got a question up top there in the balcony. If you can speak loud, try it that way, otherwise we'll grab my attention.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Great question. So, couple thoughts just to put that in context, is that wood is a relatively low carbon footprint structural material. And so what that means is if we simply stopped harvesting and producing wood, it could have a perverse outcome, right? So now one could hope that everybody would simply not consume, but that's probably unlikely in the short term, at least. So that is likely to cause substitution with cement and steel, which tend to have higher climate impact per unit of utility. And so what that means is that production systems, there are certainly more, let's just say more marginal production systems in places of particular conservation concern with important species, et cetera, that should be protected and just stopped. But the bulk of production systems, if we are to do it in a way that is climate smart, need to be improved, but not stopped. And so, yes, absolutely. There are a whole variety of ways in which we can do that. You may be, as familiar as I am with those, but they include extending harvest rotations, lower impact machinery to avoid collateral damage to the so-called residual stand, various forms of silviculture that allow for improved regeneration of the next cycle. And basically, a lot of these things are kind of mimicking natural disturbances in ways that allow forests to be healthy and diverse, even while producing wood for us. And of course, they're in Connecticut, I think we're mostly talking about natural forest under timber production. In other areas and some places in Connecticut, you're going to have plantation forestry. And there's another story about, there, particularly in plantation forestry, extended rotations can be helpful. So I think hopefully that speaks to your question.
So we've had the overflow was having trouble hearing, so
Oh.
we'll do one mic. So if we don't get, we're going to go to questions down here first, but I'm going to start moving upstairs with Mike. Okay, and if you can repeat just the gist of the question, that would be helpful as well.
Right, Ricky's up there.
Oh, Ricky's up there. Okay, great. We've got Mike. Thank you. Go ahead, Ricky. Yep.
Hi.
No, go ahead. Go ahead down here first.
I just had a question about the last slide with the peak land. You seem to imply that part of that was the use of land for land for agriculture. And I know you're probably very aware that there's a huge shift between natural agriculture sometime in the late 1800s, early 1900s, where we've gone to an oil-based agriculture. And it would seem like connected to all this is the whole peak oil issue and the issue that we aren't really farming anymore. We're really just, taking calories of oil, putting, using the land as sort of a medium for that, and producing food directly from the oil. So I do wonder how this all relates. I think it relates more to the method of farming and what's happened with energy resources, and how that will play into the future is a little different. So could you address that in terms of how that was taken into consideration in that analysis?
So I think folks heard that, but just to say it's a question about the use of fossil fuels and other kind of, let's just say, challenging dimensions of modern agriculture and how that plays into this peak land question. It's a great question. I will just be a little humble here, and I'm not sort of in deep on the question of different of fossil fuel use. But I certainly understand the basics of it. And so so I think that that I'm sort of an all of the above kind of guy, I guess, and that I think that there are very intensive production systems that right now use fossil fuels that can be incredibly efficient at producing food and reduce the spatial footprint. So I do think that there is a place for, in fact, a very important place, if we can find ways of improving the efficiency of that production system. So there's wasteful modern agriculture and there's very efficient and pretty effective modern agriculture. And I think we need to keep shifting towards lower fossil fuel use in those production systems. But my understanding is that they have done the math. I'm not the one that did the math on those particular agricultural pathways, but they have done the math and included those fossil fuel emissions in these analyses. And my understanding is that intensive agriculture that is done effectively and efficiently is a very important part of that solution. So the amount of agricultural production per hectare, per acre, is so vastly higher if we do modern methods that taking more marginal production systems and releasing those lands is actually, I think, a bigger deal in terms of climate than not allowing, you know, some of those modern techniques. But I absolutely agree with you that we have to figure out how to shift out of a more fossil fuel based modern agricultural system. So I think I agree with your central point, but I'm just saying that I think we have to find ways of continuing to improve and use that more intensive production system in order to sort of take the pressure off of the vast majority of lands. One of the most dramatic examples of this, and this actually, often people are, you know, many of us live in cities and we're asking, like, we're not the land managers, what do we do? 70% of our food production, 70% of our agricultural lands are used to produce 5% of our food in the form of livestock production. So you just think about the level of that inefficiency. So the shift to plant-based meats, essentially, you know, a pound of chicken takes 1/10 the land of a pound of beef. So these are the sorts of things that I think can make a huge difference. Even while we also improve the sort of reduce the fossil fuel needed for agricultural production. So one final point is there's something called biochar, which is a way of basically taking the stover, the residue of, let's just say, corn stalks and things like that from an agricultural field, putting it into a charring process that basically creates charcoal that's very persistent, return that to the soil. So it avoids the decomposition of that, and that improves soil fertility, and that can reduce the need for those kind of fossil fuel based fertilizers in agricultural systems. So there's just a lot of creative ways that we need to look for to address the sort of question you just raised.
So question up top there? Yes.
Hi.
We'll see who else is raising their hand.
All right. Thank you so much for your presentation. I think there's a lot of numbers that we all would like to see a little bit more clearly, but we get a sense of it. My question is also about the peak land graph. In particular, I wanted you to expand a little bit on how the millions of hectares of land was classified and whether it also incorporated agroforestry crops, you know, soy and corn for animals. Was it just human based? Does it include small diversified farms in different states? So if you can expand more on that, how that number was calculated.
Yes. So it's a hyper simplistic calculation. In that, yes, I think all forms of active land management lands would be put into this kind of category of human footprint. So anytime we are displacing a native ecosystem with something else, and you're absolutely right, like there's a huge gray zone there, and there are all kinds of actively managed systems which are actually maintaining and you know, creating habitat for biodiversity and providing a lot of these services that are essentially somewhere in between. And there's a lot of space for that. And there's a whole debate about so-called sharing versus sparing, which is to say, to what extent do we try to integrate production and natural ecosystems, natural ecosystem functions into production systems versus separate them out, do the intensification and then protection. And there's a lot of fascinating discussions about that whole issue. So I would just say the peatland issue is kind of much simpler and more macro in terms of that graph than that, much more nuanced and important discussion. And I think the answer to that question usually depends upon where you are. It depends upon a lot of factors about the production system and the native system, and how to either sort of separate those and intensify and protect versus kind of integrate them and produce, both in the same place. So I don't have a simple answer for you, but I will just say that that the fundamental, I think the fundamental point there is simply that that these really basic phenomenon of population growth and essentially the fact that we're peaking population growth, and this ongoing improvement in our understanding of how to produce food with smaller footprints is combining for a macro trend of this quite positive. But I'm concerned I didn't really answer your question. But just to say that, I don't want to that graph is only telling us at a very surface level of a lot of complexity that I think you're pointing towards.
We've got time for one more question. Let us get you a mic. Our overflow room can't hear you without the mic. So.
And I would say, while I'm making my way over that workshop, next you can talk to him more directly through that, and we'll also have more Q&A after the roundtable here. So if you don't get to ask me the questions directly now, if you grab it to the workshop or even today, even now after the roundtable discussion.
All right, I'm equipped with a mic. I think we all appreciate data-based solutions. I think that's really important. And my question is pretty general. How much reliance on or intersection with drawdown? I'm sure you're familiar with that. Yeah. That's my question.
Okay, sure. So actually the paper that we published that was the basis for that basically was the paper that fed right into that estimate of the IPCC report that I mentioned. That included drawdown scientists. So we had been, let's just say, somewhat siloed. The sort of group of scientists that I worked with had not had much historic interaction. But then most recently, when we kind of all came together to make sure that we were, that we were benefiting from each other's bodies of knowledge. And so, yes, so we now essentially, through that IPCC report, have a sort of consensus set of data. Sorry. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, drawdown. So there's a project drawdown. Is it Paul Hawken, I think, who is an individual who has been very influential in the environmental field. And he, I think he was it Smith and Hawken that he was wealthy individual. And he started the project drawdown and brought a bunch of scientists together to basically ask a lot of the same questions that I and others in my field have been asking. And so, yeah, so it's just they're part of the scientific community that is looking at these questions. Yeah, so Project Drawdown, I think, is looking for so they did not limit themselves to natural climate solutions. This was a group of people that got together and asked the question, like, how do we draw down, how do we remove carbon from the atmosphere? There are lots of methods for doing that. Most of them are, as we talked about, are natural, but there are, engineering solutions and other solutions that we can look at. And they were just a group of people that got together to sort of ask that question. I actually don't, so I haven't interacted with them a huge amount, but we have come together most recently, and it's kind of all integrated now into these most latest reports.
Thank you. I'm going to call up the panelists now so we can get that discussion going and hold more of your questions so that we can ask them at the end.
We can take one chair out. All right, many thanks to Bronson for that wonderful presentation. We're going to follow this up now with a panel discussion among some local experts from here in Connecticut. Our thought behind offering this panel was to take some of these global and national concepts that Bronson shared with us and to discuss more about how they're applied at a local level here in Connecticut. And so very quickly, I'll just ask our panelists to maybe come down the line and introduce themselves. And then I will start us off with a couple of discussion prompts. And just make sure you're speaking into the mic for everybody. Julia, you wanna?
Hi, everyone. My name is Julia Rogers. I'm the Senior Land Protection Manager for the Housatonic Valley Association. So we're a watershed organization and land trust serving Western Massachusetts, Western Connecticut, and Eastern New York.
Stay go, everybody. My name is Mother Shoran Waupatukuay Piper. I am the tribal head leader for the Golden Hill Paugussett Tribe here in Connecticut and Trumbull and Colchester. Author of the book Red Road, Medicine, Woman, and Spiritualist for my tribe.
Good morning, I'm Andrea Urbano. I supervise Connecticut's Division of Forestry's urban forestry and forest stewardship programs.
Hi, I'm Dr. Mayra Rodríguez. I am an agriculture extension agent with the cooperative extension system of the University of Connecticut. For those who are not familiar with that, we have one in every land grant university, and our role is to extend the science to the people to support communities, municipalities, and producers.
And we all know Bronson, so we won't go with that. So as we think about the role of natural and working lands in addressing the climate crisis, we learned so much about how mitigation is a really critical component of that solution. Bronson touched on this a little bit, but another important factor is what he sort of classified as ecosystem-based adaptation, meaning resilience and adaptation, effectively ability of ecosystems to withstand the changes that were expected and that we have forecasted with the changing climate. So let's start our discussion there, discussing the interplay of mitigation, resilience, and adaptation. How can these concepts work together in Connecticut, and when might conservation and stewardship practices create greater benefit in one category than another? Who won?
I can kick us off if no one else wants to. The way I sort of think about this is from a regional perspective. So at the Housatonic Valley Association, we coordinate an initiative that we call Follow the Forest, which is all about protecting and connecting this large wildlife climate corridor that extends from the southern Hudson Valley of New York through Connecticut, Massachusetts, and southern Vermont, all the way to Canada. And so when we're thinking about natural climate solutions and the work of land trusts to fit into this, we're really thinking about it from this regional perspective of how do we all fit within this bigger picture. So whether you're talking about an individual looking to steward a piece of land, or whether you're talking about how your organization fits into it. And I think that intersects really well with the concepts of adaptation, mitigation, and resilience. When you're thinking about all three of those, the question is sort of, how does it fit with your own stewardship goals? Where does it fit with your understanding of the climate crisis? And really, how can you then inform your own choices for stewardship and conservation based on your understanding?
Very well said. Thank you, Julia, for kicking us off. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. Is this better? Yeah. Thanks for the feedback. Just to piggyback off of Julia's comment, all of these approaches to natural-based climate solutions, adaptive approaches, mitigation, and approaches that promote a resilient landscape need to be applied at all scales, regional and landscape, and even all the way down to the parcel or stand level in the concept of forestry. There's a lot of intersect. If you think about these three approaches as a Venn diagram, There's a lot of complementary practices that achieve multiple goals. We see this in forestry and practice this in forestry all the time. So many mitigation approaches to forest management, for example, can also promote forest resilience, health, and function, and the ability of the landscape to either respond quickly, recover quickly from a natural disturbance or human disturbance, or withstand that disturbance. Many of these practices also promote adaptation. And so as forestry professionals in the state deep forestry, we are really focused on that, finding that intersection, promoting that intersection, and providing you all with the tools necessary to implement that. I don't want to hog the mic, but I can talk about this forever. So I'll stop.
We have a workshop with you, Andrea, so.
Yes. Aaron, not, I could add that reference, that report. Okay, so my area of expertise is forestry, specifically carbon forestry. So excuse my bias, but really getting back to the science, there was a report that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Heisted published it, I believe, in 2022, that focused on some natural-based climate solutions, highlighting 5 pathways that touch on adaptation, mitigation, and resilience. And really what it calls for is a multifaceted approach. We need a portfolio of management options, and we need that portfolio represented on all spatial scales. So these include avoided deforestation, changing development practices to reduce deforestation by 75% in the region. It includes wildland reserves, so passive or reserve-based management, calling for about 10% of existing forests to be reserve-based management. I just want to make clear that that's a very active decision. It can't be arbitrarily picked on a map. It has to be informed by ground truth. Only healthy functioning systems are suited for that. Improved forest management, which we will talk about more in individual sessions. Mass timber construction, so replacing concrete and steel in new development and multifamily housing with wood in about 50% of those new developments. And then urban and suburban forests, so increasing urban tree canopy cover and suburban tree canopy cover by 5%. And Connecticut has actually put that into policy. So we are getting there.
So a lot of this is really high for me. I'm not that tall. So I focus on urban and community forestry. So a lot of my work, it's really narrowed down to cities throughout the state. And of course, as like my colleagues mentioned, these are mitigation, adaptation, resilience. We should be thinking about all of this at the same time, right? But obviously some of us might be frustrated because it's not within our power to really implement strategies that affect all or that really focus on each topic. I truly believe that being able to work on mitigation strategies and adaptation and resilience strategies all together require a number of actors. So we will have to see government, community, and non-governmental organizations working together to really do work that intersects on all areas. When I work in a community-focused project, it's more about outreach, community engagement, and just spreading awareness of these things. It's Saturday. I don't normally speak English on Saturday. Sorry about that. A lot of the work focuses more on like how can we become more resilient and how can we adapt with the changing climate in our household, right? Or being renters, for example. Like there's not a lot that we can do necessarily that has a large scale impact. There's more household level strategies. So a lot of my outreach on that side focuses on this, but it's in the projects in which I'm able to connect community narrative and experiences with non-governmental institutions and governmental institutions to really like integrated project that I'm really able to focus on all these different dimensions of it. So I just wanted to mention the importance of having a multi-actor kind of approach if we're really aiming to try and do both sides at the same time.
I'm going to skip around our question order a little bit, so just a heads up, but that's a perfect segue into this question about collaboration. And Bronson's talk really discussed how we need all hands on deck right now, doing everything we can in this sphere, and that we need to be working together and collaborating with one another. So in the context of natural climate solutions, what do you, as our panelists here working in Connecticut, see as some standout examples of successful partnership in Connecticut? And what do you think led to the success of those partnerships and their impact?
Can everybody hear me? Okay, perfect. With a lot of our lands and working with tribal and intertribal and non-intertribal, we work very closely with DEP so that we could inform in-house and out-house, basically like non-tribal, for all of the proper healthy natural ways, and having different sessions where it's not just for tribal invited, but it's also for non-tribal, so everybody can know how to properly take care of their homelands and their property or farming or workplace or school or what have you. So we work very closely with DP and let everybody informative and have different sessions for that so everybody can properly be healthy and work on that climate change and know what to do and what not to do and what's to come.
I'll add to that. So as I mentioned, my work focuses a lot on cities, and it takes a community forestry kind of approach to things. So we're really trying to elevate the voices of community members in the decision-making process as it relates to our forests and to nature in general. And so in terms of collaborations, although I've been in Connecticut for two years only, really observing beautiful partnerships happen takes a long time. Takes a long time to build trust within this different, especially when you're working with communities that have been very much exposed to changes in the climate that we're experiencing today, right? And it just takes a very long time, but I think being very intentional of what's the audience that you're trying to reach, right? And again, I kind of like come at it from an education and outreach perspective. But if in my case, I am trying to engage the Latino community, right? Aiming to build partnerships with organizations that already reach that audience is very important, right? So perhaps we're very comfortable with partnerships we already have, another environmental organization, for example, and you guys do great work together. But if it's not reaching that audience, then perhaps it's a moment to kind of like rethink what would be a good approach for that, right? So if you have an audience in mind, and being able to, I guess, bridge the gap between an organization that already serves that audience, but maybe from a very different topic like health services or legal services, being able to make a connection between that topic and the work that you're doing. So obviously, nature is very crucial for our health. And so being able to, I guess, convey that to the potential partner and really nurture that relationship. So I guess it's more about being able to be strategic about the partnerships that you want to build, being realistic about the fact that if you don't have a pre-existing relationship with that partner, it's going to take a long time to nurture that relationship, being patient and open about it, and trying to compromise also on our approaches. Because if you're working with someone that's in a completely different field, their approach at things is going to be very different. So just being able to do that kind of compromise.
I think, Mayra, your point about being able to connect with people is so key to all of our work and so much of what we do to make, if we're not able to connect with folks, then any conversation around resilience, mitigation, adaptation is sort of a moot point. If we're using words or language that doesn't reach the audiences we're trying to connect with, then we're operating in different spaces and it's no longer relevant. And so to your point, when you're really building those partnerships, being mindful of our choices around those words and what, what means something to me may not mean the same to someone else. And I think that is really critical. And I feel like one of the places where we hit challenges with the media too, right? There's a lot of spin that gets taken on words that are used or research studies that come out that put a bias in various folks' minds. So from our perspective at HVA, partnership is sort of key to what we do. And I don't see how we would have success without a lot of our partners. And one of the ways in which we do that is through a regional conservation partnership called the Litchfield Hills Greenprint. I see so many of our partners here in the room today. And what I think is really interesting about the way that partnership has worked, so to your point, it's a long-standing partnership. It was created first back in 2008. So we've built a lot of history and trust with these organizations. And what I love about it is we go from the very local land trust all the way up to the multiple regional organizations that sit within our landscape. So we can sort of play with this push-pull of local organizations and the knowledge they have of their communities and the exactly how their communities are experiencing the climate crisis, all the way up to the regional organizations that have different perspectives. And so I think too, when you're thinking about partnership, the scale of the different partners can really result in different actions. And that scale is critical in the face of the climate crisis.
Bronson, I want to give you a chance to chime in about sort of coming from the science community here. What effective tools have you found in terms of communicating the research that's going on either within universities or NGOs like Conservation International, and how is it, what are effective tools to communicate that out, not only to organizations in this room but to the communities and populations we serve?
So Conservation International does not work directly in Connecticut, and so I certainly am less qualified, I think, in that sense to represent in the local context. I used to work in the Nature Conservancy, which of course TNC is very active. I'm sorry. I'll cut to the chase here. So a couple of different thoughts. So one of them is just a big picture thought, which is that there's a incredibly exciting. So climate change, challenge is opportunity. There are debates and disagreements within our conservation community that have been longstanding, and I think the individual that asked about forest management versus wildlands, that is one of those debates that's been out there, and so but this is an opportunity to sort of break through, I think, what are sort of some longstanding kind of log jams or differences between different groups and create partnerships. So we've got to have an increase in wildlands. We've got that, protection is a crucial part of the story. We also need to figure out how to maintain production in a substantial portion of production forests, maintain production and improve the form of production and have better climate smart forestry. And those two groups that are involved in kind of improved production systems and wildlands, we're all part of the same movement. And so I think those groups can get together and think about, like, okay, so how do we prioritize, how do we prioritize where and spatially where we're going to do this and kind of come up with an integrated approach. So that's just, I guess, just a comment that I think that this is a huge opportunity to form those partnerships and kind of break down some barriers that have been there. One other thought on the local to kind of global question is that usually when we're talking to local communities, you can't just talk about climate change because climate change, this is a global issue. There are local communities in other that I've interacted with that refer to sort of financing for climate as sky money. It's like, what it doesn't really speak to kind of the local reality too well. And the local reality is often about other things, about whether it's water, whether it's wildlife, whether it's any number of ways in which communities interact with their ecosystems. And so I do think that part of that, and I'm really just repeating what I think has already been said by my colleagues here, but a big part of this is just I think essentially recognizing the strength of natural climate solutions is that it's not just about carbon. It's about a whole variety of different things. And so essentially we need to be able to speak one language at a local level about the things that are relevant locally. And we often need to speak another language at a global level to urban, communities and other communities that are on this sort of other side of this equation. But I will say that communication is both verbal and and sort of financial resources. So money speaks, obviously, if it's done in a good way. So we do need, I think, to sort of, in effect, create partnerships and communicate in ways where we say, okay, if urban communities are really concerned, if elite urban communities are really concerned about climate change, well, then let's get the resources to the rural communities to help them essentially improve their economies and invest in their economies in ways that are climate smart.
I couldn't have asked for a better transition there. Next question is thinking about this concept of making sure that climate benefits are experienced equitably across the landscape that we're working in. And we've talked about the importance of nature-based solutions, the importance of collaboration in achieving those solutions. So what are some considerations for working across Connecticut's different landscapes with different populations? And how can land trusts and community organizations ensure that the work they're doing is done equitably?
This is my favorite topic. I've experienced, I think, this question from many different, I guess, perspectives. My background is as a researcher, so a lot of the work that I used to do was making this beautiful geospatial analysis and creating these beautiful maps that helped me and my team or this group of stakeholders that I was working with identify what we would define as a vulnerable community without even at any point given talking with that community. Right. So how are we even saying they are vulnerable because we added, social data, economic data, public health data, all the data, we would just add all the data, we will synthesize all of this, we will do an index and we'll say, this is where we're going to work and this is where we're going to plant a bunch of trees without even asking if people want trees, without even seeing what's the community's perspective of those trees. And that was very frustrating for me because I was in the side of doing the mapping analysis. And that's kind of what led me to my role here now, right, as an extension agent, feeling that I could kind of change the approach that I was taking to that. And so a lot of the work that I do now more is even just starting those conversations, right? I know people get frustrated about just talking. We talk so much and we don't do enough. But sometimes when it's for a topic like this, like equity, being able to understand each other's perspective, it's what's going to allow us to really know how to move forward, right? How to build those partnerships, what's the best approach, how to really make it more inclusive and equitable. And so just having basic conversations, creating safe spaces and that are accessible, not doing at 11 a.m. in the middle of the week, right? That if you're expecting a community that, are mostly families, you have to either offer programming for kids or childcare. Then you're going to be surprised nobody came to talk with you about climate change, right? So just those basic conversations and being able to understand what people's own experiences and stories with climate change is. If their experience is that their house got destroyed because a tree fell on it after a storm, if their experience is that they're feeling extremely hot during the summer because of heat waves while they're outdoor workers, then that's their experience and that's completely valid, right? And they might not have a positive view towards trees, or they might not have, or maybe they do. Maybe they come from a background where they really value nature. I grew up in the middle of a city with barely any trees, but we grew so much food in the tiny backyard we had that I have a strong connection to that, right? So everybody's experience is different, and being able to create these conversations and start identifying themes and priorities and challenges that a community is facing. And from there, start moving towards a more participatory type of mapping approach in which you really bring all these maps that we can get really good at making as people to to point towards where the key issues are at. And from there, moving on to a conversation more, what type of solutions can we apply? And maybe we want to take a focus towards nature-based kind of solutions, right? Rain gardens or planting trees, but allowing communities to be able to dictate what solutions are actually appropriate for the challenges that they're facing, and adding the expertise, scientific expertise that a lot of us here might have, right? And from there, really then focusing on how can we implement the solutions and still track its, I guess, impact. How can we assess whether it's working? What's the sustainability or the long-term plan to maintain that solution? So that it's not just we plant a bunch of trees and I forgot about it, and then the community has to figure out how to maintain it, right? So I guess that's kind of my answer to that question.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'll just add that this is promoting equitable distribution of tree cover, access to healthy functioning systems is a priority at the state level and is getting a long overdue attention and is being, I would argue, effectively addressed within DEEP and other state agencies. Internally, the department has invested in groups like CJAC that are informing program staff and collaborating together to help realize these goals on the ground. This is perhaps best exemplified through our urban and community forestry program, where there's a great emphasis right now with the unprecedented funding the program has received to target projects support to historically underserved or underrepresented communities. And just shedding light on a previous question you asked, Aaron, like this is where I see some of the best opportunity and greatest use of partnerships, with the acknowledgement that Andrea, at the Division of Forestry, don't know what this subset of the community in whatever municipality that's never applied for a grant before needs. So how do I best serve that community? By identifying the key stakeholder groups in that community, by engaging others like Mayra, or there's our partnerships are extensive, to really cater their services to their specific needs. And there are tools being developed as we speak to help us identify and target communities and areas of focus, particularly vulnerable communities where investment is needed. And so all of this is to say that it's important. We're taking great strides in achieving these goals, and it takes the hands and minds of many across disciplines and sectors. And it's a really exciting time to be in the natural resource profession in that regard.
Andrea, could you just define CJAC for those?
Yeah, except I need my phone to look up the acronym.
I could help you.
So it has environmental justice and
the Council on Equity and Environmental Justice, or the Council,
the council.
Connecticut Equity and Environmental Justice Advisory Council.
Yes, and so.
And I just want to give a special shout out to my colleague Yao, who does chair the land subcommittee on that. He might be in the overflow room, but.
And within CJAC, there are different working groups. And so Forestry Division deals most closely with the land subgroup. And it's just been a tremendous improvement, catering our programs to be more inclusive and effective in this context.
And just to add to all that, we all know that Mother Earth is hurting, so everybody's trying to do their part. Everybody's trying to get together as, the communities and partnerships. We all know that trees give off our oxygen and they give off gallons and gallons of water. I hear all the time through all the climate change, the heat, the weather, what's El Nino, all the trees they're cutting, all the animals are coming out. Why are all the animals in my backyard? Well, because you cleared out your backyard and built a mansion. So that's why you see all these different animals coming out. They're losing their areas and their homes. well, what could we do? What could we do? I get these questions all the time, and the joke, if everybody, I'm sure everybody here has seen that movie Total Recall, with that Mars area and they're all losing the oxygen point place. So I get, some people that make jokes about, though, I hope we don't end up in that, scenario situation. We know, what could we do? Well, there is ways of solutions. There is a way to bring back a lot of those trees and, like she was saying, and the seeds, and just the communities and everybody just getting together in partnership, you are able to replace back what has been taken out in a natural way.
And I would just add to all of these great comments. I think one of the things, especially for the land trusts in the room, is that it can be easy to be really one-dimensional, right? We've been talking all about natural climate solutions, which sort of naturally biases us to large blocks of forest, right? They're storing and sequestering a lot of carbon, but we sell ourselves short if we stop right at just this one-dimensional thought of how do we solve the challenge of the carbon that's in the atmosphere. And you all made such good points about how critically important it is to engage communities and understand what folks are feeling on the local level. And I would just challenge the land trusts in the room to think, even if you have a mission area or service area that's dictated, let's say, by town lines or something, think a little bit broader. How does your town impact the region that you sit within? What are those items that you're considering within your region, your town, your individual municipality? And how do your choices impact not just the people who live or are coming to visit there, but also sort of that broader community? We have to think not just at one scale, but at multiple scales and multiple dimensions for this, to have any success with the climate crisis.
I like that. And I wanted to add, not just think one dimensionally, thinking, as you said, how does what impact my strategy or the approach that I'm taking in this geographic area will have in the geographic area nearby or further out, the impact that it will have also in this generation, the generation to come, and the impact that it has not just in people, but for non-humans, any type of nature as well.
Okay, just one, I know, sorry. Just one kind of bigger picture contextual point. Connecticut, and if you come to my talk later, you're going to hear this again, but Connecticut is 56-ish% forested, 1.8 million acres. 72% of that acreage is owned privately by you and me. I only own 1.67 acres of that, but nonetheless, the onus of climate-based solutions, working our lands to be a solution to this crisis, is on you and me. And so contextualizing your parcel at the regional and landscape scale is a critical component to ensuring success in our efforts. Think about what surrounds you, how your little chunk fits into the bigger picture. And right now, more than any recent history I can think of in my relatively brief career, there is unprecedented funding and resources available to you and me to make this happen. And just one related point, of those 72% privately owned, demographic, 90% of those landowners are 55 and up in age. And what this tells me is one of the most critical components to managing our landscape as a solution to climate change is preventing subdivisions, development, and land ownership change. This is a critical time for Connecticut to focus on conservation. And that's why I'm so grateful for all of you. Keep up the good work.
That's actually a terrific segue into the next question. We've heard a lot about climatic changes that we're going to be experiencing. We're talking about shifts in generational changes and land ownership. So I want to end our panel discussion with a conversation about sort of looking forward and what changes to anticipate, how to adapt to those changes, What do you all see as the biggest thing on the horizon that our land trust community and land conservation community should be considering and opening their eyes to, perhaps, or embracing, or at least preparing for?
Well, first and foremost, have a plan for your land. Everything starts with a vision. Everything starts with a plan. It's catered to your goals and interests. That can be a conservation plan, estate planning. So that piggies back off my previous point, and a management plan. And management plans or stewardship or land stewardship plans are multifaceted. And there's a lot of resources out there, including some that come from my team of great staff, available to you to help inform the process and maybe even offset some of the costs associated thereof. So I'll just start with that.
And please don't be afraid to ask for help. You can ask any of our departments or agencies for any advice, any suggestions, come out and see something. I know that I get a lot of questions. Well, should I call this department? Should I call, or me and my family will handle it? You know, just don't be afraid to ask for help, because there are people out there that we can come out and, you know, assess or help you with a lot of your goals or plans and see how things are going. But yeah, please don't ask, you know, don't be afraid to ask for help, because we're here. It's there to help you out.
I think the other thing that we as land trusts have to be really mindful of is there are so many needs within our communities right now. And those needs translate to demands on the lands. And so we have to be really strategic in thinking about conservation. Every piece of land is not going to be critically important for conservation. And there are other needs within our communities that land could be used for, whether that's thinking about renewable energy and needs for solar, wind, and other sources of renewable energy, or whether that's affordable housing so that our communities can continue to be sustainable. And so I think thinking about conservation from, again, this perspective of bringing in all of these different uses, we have to be working closely with community members and municipalities, the municipal governments, to be able to think strategically about this landscape and say, where are those critical pieces of land, whether that's for forested habitats that are supporting biodiversity and natural climate solutions and connecting one large core forest to the next, or whether that's that critical piece of wetland habitat or farmland that's producing food, or protecting the habitat for the rare, threatened, and endangered species. So being selective in how we use our resources so that our communities are sustainable. I think we're going to continue to see those demands as the landowners change over, and as we see more older and older landowners, we have to be prepared for that and understand where we fit in the picture and where it's important to step down and let others share that too.
You know, I was just, one thing I would add is, oh, I know I have to speak more into this. What? Is it? Yeah, okay, it's the mic. Okay. Is just thinking about, you know, first of all, it's thrilling to hear that there is this increase we're seeing in resources to sort of make changes, and now there's this critical question of how to make those changes in an effective, in a good way. So I think let's be optimistic and imagine that those resources will continue to ratchet up, right? You know, as we've been discussing, like this is the most underinvested space in the climate, in the effort to stabilize our climate. What you all are doing is still the least invested space. There's a huge investment gap. So what if that changes? What if there is a more meaningful value placed upon conservation and restoration and better management of ecosystems? And then just thinking about what will that look like? I think some of those changes are going to be very technical and very, you know, relatively psychologically relatively easy. Like, oh my gosh, if you put a culvert in to a road that brings back the natural flow of water into and out of what was a saltwater salt marsh, that can reduce methane emissions. And well, you just have to put the culvert in. That's, you know, that's nice and easy. Like, let's just get the funding to do that and do it. Other things I think are going to be psychologically difficult. my father has land up in Maine. We have a family place up in Maine, and there are these pretty big fields that are hayed every year for, well, for hay. And there's not a lot of social good that's coming out of that hay. But it's a huge part of a cultural, it's a huge cultural phenomenon. It's part of a history in that landscape. It's a part of an aesthetic. And in talking to my father about this, like, Dad, why don't we just, so we're not, it doesn't cost anything to us because there's a farmer locally that does the haying, and he does it just simply for the value of the hay. And so we don't pay him, he doesn't pay us. It's that simple. So I say, look, it'll cost us nothing. Why don't we just stop haying some of those fields and let the forest grow back? It's free. And there's a psychological barrier there because it is a very important part of our understanding of the way these landscapes look and the way in our history with these landscapes. And it does impact people. But if there was a value, my dad's also, he will respond to $1. And so if there was actually a positive financial incentive to make that shift, I think he might do it. So I guess what I'm saying is, these are the sorts of decisions that are going to come our way, I hope. And I do think we sort of almost have to prepare ourselves a little bit for, like, okay, what is that landscape going to look like if you actually value climate?
Aaron, I think in your question, you asked what we might expect to see changing in the landscape. And there are a few topics brought up in responses that I just want to highlight or summarize. So one is we've already experienced a change and are experiencing a change in our natural disturbance regimes, right? We're getting less snowfall, we're getting more rainfall, in intense events with drier periods in between, just to name a few. Our current infrastructure is not good enough for this. And so an area of focus is investing in infrastructure that can handle these extreme events. You mentioned culverts, increasing the size of culverts. There's something in forestry called best management practices for water quality. We need to exceed what's written in those guidelines because they're based on data from 10, 20 years ago that are not reflective of the current weather patterns and dynamics. There's conflicting, it could be easily considered conflicting guidelines coming from the state. We need to increase affordable housing and we need to protect this land for a green plan. How do we balance these needs and goals? Because both are critical. And that's a real challenge. I know I'm being faced with that even in my own hometown. How do we meet our conservation goals and diversify our housing options? And I don't have an answer. But together we can come up with one, I'm sure of it. We're gonna see a shift in species. We're already seeing it. More invasives, spread and a greater abundance of what we have, and introductions of more southerly species as our habitats become more suitable. And what does this mean to you as a landowner or manager? And how do you value native biodiversity versus non-native? In terms of carbon storage capacity, if we have a landscape inundated with invasives in the understory, you can forget about our long-term carbon storage capacity. One catastrophic wind event and that carbon source, the future carbon storage capacity of that land is gone. So I think invasives, maintaining biodiversity, in terms of forestry, maintaining what's called structural complexities. So having diversity in the size, spacing, and arrangement of both live and dead vegetation is key to both adaptation, resilience, and mitigation. Yeah, those are my key points.
Any last comments from the panel?
I just add one thing, which is that I sort of like to think of it like investments. You would not put your entire retirement investment or other investment in one spot. You would diversify that portfolio so that you're sort of playing your bets, right? Your odds. One of those or multiples of those are going to do well, and it's okay if something else doesn't. And I think when we think about natural climate solutions and the crisis that we're faced with, the biodiversity crisis, the declining insect population, we don't ultimately know what our world is going to look like in 50 or 100 years. So we sort of have to hedge our bets a little bit and look at different solutions and have different strategies throughout the landscape where they make sense. And so I like to think that we need this investment strategy of diversified options informed by that regional context that we're playing with. So I just encourage all of you to sort of think about that, and also think about anytime you make a choice about your land stewardship, to think about what's happening around you and where you sit within that picture.
I think that's a wonderful note to end on. Please join me in giving these folks a round of applause. This has been a great discussion. I think everybody on the panel is presenting in at least one workshop, so please, if you have questions, follow up with them at those workshops. Great opportunity to connect with them, and I know Amy's got a few last words to say, so sit tight and we'll be out of here in a minute.
Really not much more than that, other than to thank our panelists and Bronson one more time, and also to you, Aaron, for doing such a great job of facilitating. So I guess I misspoke slightly when I said we'd have time for Q&A. We don't. There's so much good stuff here, and so much, if it's not only will be captured in the workshops, but I was listening very carefully at a lot of the words that were being said today. I really want you to look at that call to action. Take a look at the bills that we are prioritizing. I would say everything that was said in here today is captured in those bills, from incentives to sustainable economies, to workforce, to what's that? Well, not those two, but in any event, and then of course, nature-based solutions. So please take a look at those bills, take that call to action. Today, there is a workshop with several legislators who will be here to answer questions and talk about policy priorities. It's a great opportunity to interact with them as well. So have a great day. Thank you all so much for being here, and we'll see you later.
Thank you for the chance to share.